Imagine a vast, sun-baked land stretching to the horizon, dust swirling, the air shimmering with heat, and a silence broken only by the distant, thunderous stampede of thousands of giant, flightless birds. Now, picture a group of bewildered soldiers, rifles in hand, standing shoulder to shoulder, ready for battle. Not against a foreign army, not against a rebel uprising, but against emus. Yes, emus. The tall, gawky, perpetually unbothered birds that roam Australia's outback. This is not the setup for a cartoon, nor the premise of an absurdist novel. This is the Great Emu War of 1932, a strange chapter in Australian history where humans faced off against birds and lost spectacularly. Our story begins in Western Australia, November 1932. The world is in the throes of the Great Depression, and the Australian government is scrambling to support its citizens, especially the veterans who had returned from the horrors of World War I. These men, having swapped their rifles for plows, were given land in the remote wheat belt region, tasked with growing wheat to feed the nation. But nature, as always, had other plans. As the wheat ripened, so did a threat unlike any the farmers had faced before. That year, an extraordinary migration occurred. An estimated 20,000 emus descended upon the fields. Emus, if you're unfamiliar, are the second largest bird in the world, towering at 6 feet, built for running, and surprisingly resourceful. They travel in mobs, think less cute gathering, and more avian biker gang, and they're absolutely relentless when it comes to food. The wheat fields, lush and inviting, became the emu's all-you-can-eat buffet. The farmers watched in horror as the birds tore through fences, trampled crops, and gobbled up grain reserves. It was a feathered frenzy that threatened their livelihoods. Desperate, they turned to the government for help. Surely, something could be done to save their harvest from this marauding menace. Enter the Australian military. If you're picturing armored tanks rolling across the plains, a squadron of soldiers advancing in formation, you wouldn't be far off. The solution, in the minds of officials, was simple. Deploy armed men equipped with machine guns. Yes, machine guns, into the outback to wage war against the emus. The operation was overseen by Major G.P.W. Meredith of the 7th Heavy Battery of the Royal Australian Artillery. 3 soldiers, 2 Lewis machine guns, and 10,000 rounds of ammunition stood ready to reclaim the fields from the feathery invaders. And so began what would become known as the Great Emu War. The first skirmish took place near the small town of Campion. Early one morning, soldiers spotted a group of about 50 emus quietly grazing. They crept into range, loaded their guns, and let loose a hail of bullets. But, as with all great comedic tragedies, things did not go according to plan. The emus scattered instantly, sprinting with astonishing speed, up to 30 miles per hour. Bullets whizzed past, the birds zigged and zagged, and before long, not a single emu was left within firing distance. The soldiers were left standing, empty shells at their feet, mouths agape. Undeterred, they tried again. This time, they spotted a larger mob, perhaps 1,000 birds, near a dam. The soldiers set up an ambush, waited for the perfect moment, and opened fire. The machine gun jammed. The emus, ever the opportunists, took off in all directions. Some reports claim only a dozen birds fell in the chaos. The rest vanished, leaving the wheat fields to their feast. It became clear that the emus were not only fast, they were cunning. Major Meredith would later remark that the birds seemed to have developed a military system, using a few sentinels to keep watch while the main force raided the crops. When threatened, the sentinels signaled the flock, and the birds scattered in all directions, rendering coordinated attacks futile. If the soldiers tried to pursue, the emus simply outran them. The war raged on for days. The soldiers, growing increasingly frustrated, mounted their guns on trucks, hoping mobility would give them an edge. Instead, the rough terrain made it impossible to aim, and the bouncing vehicles turned accurate shooting into a pipe dream. More ammunition was wasted, more emus escaped. The birds, who, by now, must have been convinced humans were the world's worst hunters, continued their rampage. Meanwhile, the press caught wind of the bizarre battle. Reports of the Emu War made headlines, alternately mocking and marveling at the spectacle of trained soldiers outwitted by birds. Jokes circulated about Australia's newest enemy. Editorials pondered whether the emus would soon march on the capital. Overseas papers picked up the story, and the world watched, bemused, as Australia tried, and failed, to defeat its avian adversaries. Balls. By the end of the first week, the results were in: 2,500 rounds of ammunition fired, a few hundred emus killed, and thousands more still feasting on wheat. The government, embarrassed by the farce, called the operation off. The soldiers withdrew, the machine guns packed away. The emus, victorious, strutted through the fields, unconcerned. But the story doesn't end there. The farmers, still desperate, pleaded for another intervention. They insisted the emus were destroying their livelihoods and that government action was necessary. Reluctantly, the military returned for a second campaign. The results were much the same. Bullets fired, birds scattered, minimal damage inflicted. The emus, it seemed, were indomitable. In all, the official tally stood at around 986 emus killed, with approximately 960 rounds of ammunition used, an average of about 10 rounds per emu. The birds not only survived, they thrived. The wheat fields suffered, the farmers fumed, and Australia's reputation as a military power took a hit, at least in the eyes of the world's ornithologists. What was it about the emus that made them so hard to defeat? For one, their size and speed. These birds are built like athletes, powerful legs, broad bodies, and an uncanny ability to sprint and pivot on a dime. Their feathers, dense and shaggy, made them surprisingly resistant to bullets. Many survived with minor wounds, simply shaking off the attack and continuing their meal. And perhaps most importantly, emus are stubborn. They go where they please, eat what they want, and refuse to be intimidated. Even by men with machine guns, the aftermath of the Emu War brought no peace. Farmers continued to struggle with emu invasions for years. Eventually, the government shifted tactics, encouraging fencing improvements and bounty schemes. Instead of military campaigns, emu control became a matter of local initiative. Less dramatic, perhaps, but certainly more effective. The Emu War left an indelible mark on Australia's history, a cautionary tale about hubris, nature's resilience, and the unpredictability of even the best-laid plans. It's a story that has inspired countless jokes, memes, and tongue-in-cheek references. To this day, Australians joke that their only defeat in battle was to an army of birds. Yet, beneath the humor, there's something profound. The Emu War was more than just a farce. It was a symptom of a nation struggling to adapt to its environment. The settlers, armed with technology and determination, found themselves outmatched by the land itself. The emus, wild and free, were a reminder that Australia is a place where nature reigns supreme, where even the most ingenious plans can be undone by a flock of birds. Let's pause to consider the emu itself, a creature emblematic of Australia. They've been around for millions of years, evolving alongside kangaroos and koalas, surviving droughts, fires, and predators. They can run for miles, swim rivers, and go weeks without water. Their diet is varied: seeds, fruits, insects, and they're remarkably adaptable. In a contest between emus and humans, the smart money, it turns out, is on the birds. Major Meredith, reflecting on the campaign, said, "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. They can face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks." A humorous exaggeration, perhaps, but not far from the truth. The emus, despite their awkward appearance, proved themselves formidable foes. The Emu War also shines a light on the unintended consequences of human intervention. The settlers, in their eagerness to tame the land, inadvertently created an environment perfect for emu migration. The cleared fields, abundant water sources, and plentiful food drew the birds in droves. In trying to conquer nature, the farmers had invited it into their midst. The legacy of the Emu War endures, not just in jokes and memes, but in the way Australians view their relationship with the land. There's a respect, born of experience, for the wild and unpredictable forces of nature. The story is taught in schools, recounted in pubs, and celebrated in pop culture. It's a reminder that, sometimes, the best response to adversity is humility and a healthy sense of humor. Over the decades, the Emu War has become legend. There are reenactments, songs, and even video games inspired by the conflict. Statues and plaques commemorate the soldiers and the birds, often with a wink and a nod to the absurdity of it all. Historians debate the details, but one fact remains. The emus won. There's something universally appealing about stories where nature upends human plans, where the underdog or underbird emerges victorious. The Emu War belongs in the pantheon of great historical oddities, alongside the time the city of Florence accidentally flooded its own streets with wine, or when a pig's mishap sparked an international crisis. It's a celebration of the unpredictable, the ridiculous, and the strangely heroic. If you ever find yourself in Western Australia, standing in a wheat field under the endless sky, you might hear the distant drumming of emu feet. The birds are still there, as indifferent as ever to human schemes. And somewhere, in the annals of history, the Great Emu War stands as a testament to their resilience and to the enduring power of the unexpected. So, next time you're facing a problem that seems insurmountable, a challenge that defies logic and preparation, remember the Emu War. Remember the soldiers, the farmers, the machine guns, and the birds that refuse to be beaten. Remember that sometimes the most formidable opponent isn't a rival with weapons or strategy, but a force of nature that simply refuses to cooperate. And above all, remember to laugh. Because history is filled with oddities, with stories that defy belief, with moments where the world turns upside down. The Great Emu War is one such moment, a tale of birds, bullets, and befuddlement that continues to captivate and amuse. In the end, Australia didn't lose a war to emus. It gained a legend, a story that reminds us of the folly of underestimating nature and the wisdom of finding humor in defeat. The emus march on, unconcerned, and somewhere in the dusty archives, the records of the Emu War gather dust, waiting for the next curious soul to stumble upon them and marvel at the day when birds became conquerors. So, as the sun sets over the outback, casting long shadows across the wheat fields, raise a toast to the emus, the unlikely victors of one of history's strangest wars. Their triumph is a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary stories come from the most unexpected places. And in the grand tapestry of history's oddities, few tales are as delightfully absurd, as enduringly hilarious, or as truly Australian as the Great Emu War.